Good morning. If you don't know us, I'm Hal Robb. This is Lois. We very recently made a trip to Panama with the mission team, and we would like to tell you a little about that. We want to, answer a couple questions. Why do we go to Panama? Actually, there are many reasons, and maybe we can present a few of those. Hopefully you got a couple last week, and we'll get a couple more next week as the members of our group come up and present. And another question, what do mission teams do? And we got to see many missions, different missions of various kinds. And we will talk a bit about them, and the other groups will talk about some of them as well. Before we began this mission trip, we met with Pastor Robert for some preparation before we went. As we were preparing, just before we left, Pastor Robert asked each of us to prepare for a short devotion time we could have each day as we were on this mission trip. It turned out we didn't have time in our schedule to work in these daily devotion meetings. But I had found something. Actually, Lois had given me a book and said, look through this and see if you can find something for devotions. I found something I thought applied to our team very well. And at the time I was doing this, the week before, we had done VBS. Each of our members had been a major player in VBS program. I thought this fits this team. And I like to read it. It's a little passage from William Allen Dromgoole, whoever that is. But it's called The Bridge Builder. An old man traveling a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast, deep, and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim. The sullen stream held no fears for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and builded a bridge to span the tide. Old man, cried a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your time in building here. Your journey will end with the closing day. You never again will pass this way. You have crossed the chasm deep and wide. Why build you this bridge at eventide? The builder lifted his old gray head. Good friend, in the path I have come, he said. There followeth me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This stream which has brought as naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building this bridge for him. Why do we do this? There are those coming after us, and they have many needs. We can make their way easier. We can remove those pitfalls that will trip them up and lead them astray. And so we went building bridges. We were building bridges in VBS, and we were building bridges on this mission trip. We were establishing relationships. I thought this passage applied not only to VBS, it applied to our mission trip, and I even caught some references to this in our Sunday school class this morning. I'm going to throw in a bit. If you're not attending our Sunday school classes or one of them, we would love to have you join us. For building our bridges internationally, we have a lot of opportunities and restrictions. Internationally, one of our leaders for the trip, a fellow by the name of O'Neill, commented one day as we come out of one of our long walks on this, and just coming up out of the subway, we stopped and paused. He was there trying to keep track of all our separate groups and make sure everybody was accounted for. But we stopped and talked with him, and he told us that as Americans, we had an opportunity to go out on the mission field. We had been handing out some tracts. My particular group was at a bus station at the end of the subway line. And he said, you as Americans have an opportunity we as Panamanians don't have. The local people here want to talk to you. They may not understand you, but they are a very friendly people, and we found that to be so. So we could hand out our tracts, which were in Spanish, and it was planting seeds. On the back of these tracts was the name of the local church that we operated from most of the time, where our Spanish as a secondary language was presented to adult groups. As far as restrictions within their culture, we didn't know just quite what to expect in Panama. We had some training before we left here. Our group met several Sundays, had a brief meal, and then a meeting together where we went over some lessons. I think maybe those are going to be available for the groups going to Ecuador, I heard this week. They are helpful. It's prepared by the International Mission Board. It covers a wide range of areas of what our missionaries encounter in different places throughout the world. We're taught about dealing with the different cultures. In some places, some areas are quite hazardous, especially in the Muslim countries and the communist countries. Fortunately, in Panama, we didn't see too many of those restrictions. But we did learn, and we learned a lot about what missionaries have to face as they go throughout the world. What are the benefits to us locally here? I think as a group, we learned a lot about how missions work, maybe how we can adapt them to our area and our town and our society. I think we learned a lot about ourselves. As Lainey mentioned last week, she and I on the Monday morning, being a couple of the most shy people there, most likely, had a little trouble opening up and starting conversations with people. But I came away from that morning different. I learned things that I could do that I didn't know I could do. We had several people groups. Well, I better let Lois have an opportunity. Do you have any comments? Go on, she says. We met several different people groups, And I think you can see them behind us on the screen. First, we had the IMB training program we went through. We spent some time with our mission team. We learned a lot, what to expect, but we still had some doubts. We'll talk about the missionaries, part of the IMB group. What do they do? Well, for the most part, they're not preaching and teaching themselves with the local populations. They are working with the local pastors and the local churches. And the Panamanians are reaching other Panamanians. And that is the most effective way. The missionaries will be gone eventually. Their local churches, their local pastors will be there for them. They need to know that. That is the relationship we are shooting for. As Americans, being able to help teach them some English language, it brings people into their churches. It opens doors for the pastors and local leaders. Another group is the translators we had. As we were non-Spanish speakers, they were very vital to what we did. Most of these translators were students or had been students a year or two before. Many of them were tied to the home church of our missionary leaders, which was Tim and Tina. And they knew them through their own home church. They were Christian kids. Many of these students are attending schools in the U.S. One I got to be quite fond of because I was with him on the first morning and he got Laney and I started was Rodrigo. He goes to Kansas and plays soccer for them. That was his opportunity for education and his way to the U.S. Do you have any comments on our International Mission Board or missionaries or translators?
I'll say something.
Okay, she's got something later. The translators were a connecting link. Almost all of them were Panamanian or Central American, some of them from close by countries. Panama City is a melting pot. A lot of people from a lot of areas have gathered there. It is a big site for people traveling because of the Panama Canal. There are huge numbers of people going through there. Also, when the canal was built, it brought in a lot of labor to build the canal and operate the canal, much of it from the Caribbean area. So most of the people are Latin. With the Panamanian local people, the pastors and church leaders, they are leading the growth of Christianity, the growth of the churches in Panama. They are working with our missionaries and the local mission board. They go to their own churches. They preach on Sunday morning. They send their people out into the communities. As we were there were many missions going on within the city. Part of the program we were on was a training mission for us. They were trying to show us as many missions and wide variety of missions as they could during the days we had. With the mission leaders doing these different missions, we saw many Panamanians who had stepped out and said, I think I can do this. And they gathered their friends and people that were around them to help them. There was the subway ministry, which I mentioned. We handed out tracts, and there were book stations within the subways back in corners where people passing by through the subway, and the majority of people either traveled by bus or subway or on foot going to and from their jobs. There are a lot of cars, but not that many for a population of over 2 million. Though it seems like it at rush hour when all the traffic gets out on the highway, and it gets quite confused and congested. Among these mission leaders, we had O'Neill, who was doing the subway ministry, Evie, who had the mission to the homeless. We had many teachers doing after-school programs for kids who needed some tutorial help with their schoolwork. And with the churches doing the English as secondary language classes. That was probably central to our mission project, that English as secondary language. But that was the opportunity for the churches to bring in people. And these were adults primarily who wanted to get this English as a second language so they could get a job or a better job. This dual language was a big benefit in Panama with obtaining jobs. Some were parents whose kids are getting English training in schools, and the parents can't help them. With our help and these evening programs, which are offered free through the church, people were being drawn in, and they were making connections with the churches that way and meeting a social need of the community. And the local population, the local people, we had the saved who were within the churches. We found them to be very friendly. On Sunday morning, we went to a local Panamanian church. We had several people come and join us and translate for us, translate the sermon as we went through. Some of it we could follow. A lot of scripture was used in the sermon. It made it easier for us. During that part of the program, we could go to our books and read in English what we were hearing in Spanish. There are those not saved. I think there are many examples of good things the churches are doing. And that is a draw. Our personal mission team, my note here says our Loco 6, we had a good time this week. We not only learned a lot of time, we got to interact with each other a lot. We got to talk with each other, we relied on each other, we supported each other. mission trips are well worthwhile for those going. And I strongly recommend it for anyone who can go. And if you think you can't go, but think there might be a possibility, then maybe you should talk to one of our pastors. Maybe they can help you figure out how you can make it happen. Got into, part of our mission team. We were paired with call them also the local Californians. Most of the mission teams for the week can be up to about 20 people. We combined with a group from Fresno, California. We found out they were not that much different from us. In fact, we had a lot in common. As we talked to them all week long, we heard their stories, where they had been, things they had done, their hopes for missions, and of course they were all active. Many of these Californians had roots, we found out, in other places in the country: Louisiana, Mississippi, Carolinas, Missouri. They looked a lot like us, and it was a great time sharing with them. And to come to a close, I'm going to talk about a highlight of the trip, and there were really many for me. I love the little children and the time we spent with them. The enthusiasm was amazing. They thought it was great that the gringos were coming to their public school to talk to them, to tell them stories, to sing and dance. And we got into the public schools because a local Baptist pastor had connections there. He was trying to make connections with the local families. The local schools let him come in, and that was the opening for him to learn to know the kids, and through those kids, their families. But one instance, and Laney last week gave an example very close to what was a big event for me and a change for me. I am most uncomfortable approaching someone cold and starting a conversation. We went to, it was a hospital in the St. Thomas area of town. It's a poor section of town. The people there in the hospitals operate a lot different than they do here. Families were allowed, when they had a child or someone in the hospital, 1 hour per day with one visitor to come in. The rest of the family would gather outside the hospital in family groups, waiting to hear something. As that one person per day went in, maybe mother went in today, father could go in tomorrow for an hour, grandmother the next day for an hour. But there was a lot of people just milling around with not a whole lot to do right outside the hospital or in their small waiting rooms. Laney, I, one member of the California group, and our translator, Rodrigo, in this case, went with us to get us started first thing on Monday morning. Lainey went up and approached the lady. She told you about that last week. And things just kind of opened up and went very well. Then it was my turn. Had an older fellow standing, leaning against a post near the awning that went into the hospital. And Rodrigo said, well, how about him? Go up and start a conversation. I thought, oh, well, here I go. But I did. I went up and went to talking. And this was through our translator, through Rodrigo. And learned that he was there at the hospital standing, waiting on his daughter who was inside. She was taking care of some paperwork and business that had to do with some tests that were being run. But he was happy to talk and tell us his story. He was retired from working on the canal. He had worked for the Americans. He had hospital benefits. That's one reason why he was there. And he told us about his life. He wanted to talk about the canal. That was one of his favorite topics, but he got to going. We got to know him in just a few minutes. And we asked him if we could pray with him about the hospital needs and his daughter, and that God would bless them and the results would come out favorable. And we got ready to leave. And as we're starting to leave and walk up the sidewalk, here comes the old fellow dragging his daughter along. He wants to introduce her to us. So we know we had some impact. And that changed me. As we look at what we did on this trip and who was changed most, I doubt anyone was changed more than the members of our team. If you have the opportunity, if you can make it work, I encourage you to try to participate in one of these mission trips. You won't regret it.
You didn't leave me any time.
Talk fast.
You think he's quiet, but he gets something interesting that he wants to talk about, and he has no sense of time. Well, I could lose track of time also, so I'm just going to... He basically said everything I wanted to say, except I stepped out of my comfort zone because I chose to this week. I left, as much as I wanted to stay with somebody in our group, I totally left our group and went with 2 people from California and a translator, and on purpose. And it was the best thing I could have done. And let the Lord lead me. And I saw the Lord work in my life. And just like Hal said, it impacted, going on a mission trip impacts us as much as it does anybody else, because we're there to encourage the people who are working. No longer than you can stay. You're there to encourage the workers. You're there for the English, to speak the English to the people. We're the gringos. We know the English. And they enjoy that. And I just want to share the devotional that I wanted to share that we didn't have a chance to. In Luke 5, it talks about the three friends that took the friend and opened up the top of the roof and had enough faith to lower the friend down to Jesus, and he healed him. And in verse 5:26, it says, "Then everyone was astounded, and they were giving glory to God, and they were filled with awe and said, 'We have seen incredible things today.'" With childlike wonder, this is Jesus speaking. After spending time in my presence, go out with a sense of wonder. Know that I can do amazing things and powerful things, things you can't imagine. I have ideas for your life that you could never think possible, but I am the Lord of impossibilities. Look for me to amaze you. Expect the unexpected blessings, because they're there. Look for me around every corner, and you will find me. Maintain that mindset, that joy and expectancy all day. Recognize me moving in your life. Praise and thank God for every blessing bestowed upon you. I am the Lord of miracles. I am the Lord who can give you unsurpassed peace. I can raise people from the dead, heal the lame, turn water into wine, calm the sea, and still the wind. With a wave of my hand, a nod of my head, and a whisper of my Father's ear, the world is forever changed. Live with a childlike wonder, curious as to what I will do next. In doing so, you will be living a joy-filled life. And what greater joy can we have than to share the one and only blessing, the one true blessing we have, Jesus Christ, with those around us.
Thanks, Hal and Lois, for that report.